People love to imagine victimization like it happens in dark alleys. Like trauma survivors are just wandering around making bad decisions, walking straight into danger. But that's not how it works, folks. Danger doesn't live in dark alleys. It lives in perfectly normal rooms, sitting right next to everybody else. Because predators don't start with crimes, they start with tests. A crude comment, a boundary pushed just a little bit too far, a moment where somebody waits to see if you speak up or if you sit there and you stay quiet. And if you were raised in an environment where pushing back wasn't safe, you were trained to hesitate during those tests. So most people only see the moment where things went really wrong. What they don't see are the 10 tiny boundary violations that happened right before that. Welcome to Country Crocked. I can't believe it's not better. Today we're talking about re-victimization and why trauma survivors aren't just walking into it. Many of them were conditioned never to recognize it until the door was already closing. But hey, before we begin, let's give a quick content note. This episode discusses sexual trauma, abuse, and military sexual assault. Please take care of yourself while listening and pause if you need to. Now, let's start the conversation.
Hey, Ange, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm sorry. Uh, I'm, Kendra is very punctual. I know you're very punctual, Kendra, and like I'm a little delayed starting. And oh my gosh, it's just, I realized at the last minute my computer was dead to the world, and so I'm running around scrambling trying to charge things. And Kendra forgets what it's like to have little kids in the house. I think because like all my personal devices are being used for like Roblox or YouTube Shorts or somebody's always wanting my password for something. And I feel like I don't have any autonomy over any of my personal electronics, and it's like I'm gonna have a conversation with my children about it later. But Kendra, I am sorry for
No,
frazzling you today.
no, it's quite all right. It's the same as I'm going to tell you, it doesn't change. I have a now 19-year-old living at home still, and I'm missing cords half the time. I have no idea where my charger is or where certain things are, and it's because he's using them and forgets, like for his PlayStation or something, and then forgets to return them. So I completely get it. Yeah, it's I'm sorry about the delay too, folks, on this episode. It's been really crazy. Angela's not in the Midwest any longer, but I am. And I am in the middle of, I don't even know what you call what I am in. We've had at the beginning of last week, we've had storms that produce crazy tornadoes, and I think we set record hail for our nation. I mean, the size of softballs. And so we have a lot of damage here at our house, but it is not near as what some people have experienced in other places. And it's just devastating. So my heart goes out if you are listening to this and you are one of those people in the affected areas. My heart goes out to you. Our prayers go out to you. So then today I wake up and we're in the middle of a blizzard. I'm so mind blown right now. Like my
And I was like
friends,
sweating yesterday, like I'm trying to be sympathetic to you guys out there, but it's not real to me.
ah,
Like it's in the 70s out here. Like I'm
it's not
sweating during
real
the
to
baseball game.
us. It's not real to us. I was just sitting outside in a 60-degree baseball game last week, and now we're dealing with this. And I mean, it's I think a high of 30 today, and it's gonna be like a low of 9. It's insane. And then my son's friend from is in college up in Wisconsin, and the college he attends is already got like 32 inches of snow. Like what? This is not normal. But you know what? It's okay. We're a little late with the podcast for good reason. And remember, our prayers are continuing with those who have really endured the brunt of this crazy weather. I mean, we're lucky. We're one of the lucky ones.
Come on in and grab a seat. There's no better place to be. Two Midwestern Gen Xers emotionally stunted. Subtlety was not part of our upbringing. So here we are in all of our glory, country crocked. I can't believe it's not better.
So today, we're talking about re-victimization, which I think goes really, Angela, hand in hand with our last podcast on spiritual gaslighting. Because that's what it is. Spiritual gaslighting is. It's re-victimization. Re-victimization happens when someone who has already experienced trauma such as abuse, manipulation, neglect, or violence, and ends up experiencing similar harm again later in life. And, as you and I both talked, we talked about the spiritual gaslighting and how our moms and other people say, forgive, forget, or they brush what we went through aside. That's, re victimization. And
Well,
people don't,
honestly,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, honestly, I was thinking about last week and, we joked about, how mad I was, and we were just gonna roll with it and let me be mad. And I wanna say thank you for letting me do that. And, I want our listeners to know, like, I don't stay mad, and I
No.
encourage you guys, like these things, these hot button topics that you've got, find a friendly ear, find a therapist or a journal, get it out, man. Like, get it out because it felt good to get out, but, what I was thinking about, this past week, and why it made me so angry, because Kendra, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I feel like the spiritual trauma is, like, my earliest and, longest extending form of trauma. Like, it's basically been happening the longest, like the sexual abuse is done, the physical abuse is done, there's still some emotional abuse that happens, in some way, shapes, or form across the board, but that spiritual gaslighting, like that's the one that still kind of is able to reach me and affect me.
Yeah, and I know that, and I'd really tried my best to, in our last episode, tiptoe around that a little bit, because it's not just you that it angers. It angers me as well. Especially growing up in the home that I grew up with. I God bless her, but it was like growing up with Mother Teresa that had blinders on, and that drove me. It was irritating. But why do you think that revictimization is an important topic that people should be talking about? Like, what is the importance of it, and why do you think it should be important enough for us to talk about, but why aren't people talking about it enough?
Well, Kendra, I feel like this topic hits home for me because I almost feel like we had a similar start to our story and then like we forked off a little bit. And where you have I don't want to generalize your behavior or, make our characteristics binary, but largely the way you approach people now is like with more discernment, with more caution, like I would venture to say you err on the side of not trusting anybody. And like I don't want to make it out like you're a cold person, but
Oh no, I
just
agree. I agree
yeah.
totally.
So Kendra, has the same start as me, and, she came up, just being abused by the people who were supposed to love her and take care of her. And so as she forges into adulthood and motherhood, she kinda comes in, like, very protective, not trusting anybody, but, like, I'm kinda the opposite, where I just keep walking into the same stuff, where maybe Kendra or her mom or anybody is like, how does she not learn her lesson? Like, how does she keep walking into the same traps? And, it's important for me to talk about because, if my own family doesn't get it, that like, how is anybody supposed to get it? And like, that's why I wanted to break it down, for the listeners that, one, if you have been a victim of some sort of childhood trauma and you have been re-victimized as an adult, like you are not stupid. It's not that you haven't learned your lessons, and it's not even that it's not that you even came in with a target on your back, but the truth is like you kind of did.
Yeah, I think too, to add to that, I think survivors, that have gone through the abuse that we went through, when people bring this topic up, I wasn't really excited about this topic because I did, and I really, when I talked to Angela about it, I was like, man, there's not going to be anything I can talk about. I'm not been re-victimized, but I have, and I didn't realize some of the characteristics that go into victimization. Um, you know, I think though we don't talk about it because sometimes I don't know about you, Angela, but we feel blamed again by the topic. You were saying that you think like use my mom and me as a reference of, we're probably sitting here like, when are you going to learn a lesson? Well, to answer that is you have come such a far way with that. And you don't fall back into, I have not seen you fall back into patterns in a very long time, or not patterns, but into situations. And that's healing. So if you're listening to this or you're watching us on YouTube and you can look at Angela's life today, I mean, there's such great progress, and there's such great progress because I'm learning to trust people.
Well,
But
one of the things we talked about in the earlier episodes that I said I would kinda explore more later is, my military sexual trauma, and, I could talk about that, without feeling some kinda way, like, it doesn't burden me, um, but it was really hard to work through at the time, so to kinda remind everybody, I had been living on my own for a while and, kinda hit some rough times where I needed mom and dad to kind of bail me out of a financial situation. And, their help was to kind of pull me back into my childhood home. And, that wasn't going well. I think, my mother and I probably regressed into some of the old hierarchies, like she was having trouble recognizing me in an adult child role and, still for lack of a better word, tried to infantilize me a little bit, like she was the ruling authority and as the mother, and, we were just having difficulty redefining our relationship. But, I was kicked out of my parents' home and I joined the military, and, just coming into that environment, there are a lot of factors working against me. So at the time when I started this program, it had only been open to women for the last couple of years. So, I had a focused class of 200 men, and, I was only one of 10 women in that class. There were so few female sailors. So we used to joke at the time, like a civilian 5 is a Navy 9, so do you know what I'm talking about, Kendra? Like if you weren't ugly, you were Navy hot, you know?
no, that's like kind of weird, like to be like the Navy categorizes that.
Like if she doesn't have a mustache or Coke can sun or Coke can glasses, then
Oh my
she's the girl
gosh.
you need to take home on Friday. But
Oh my gosh.
I was getting, like, a lot of attention, when I joined the Navy, and, some of it was flattering. Like, Kendra knows this, my friends know this. I wasn't really allowed to date in high school, and, I didn't, and, prior to being a teenager, when I was a child, I had such a low self-esteem. I was very hairy, I had a mustache, I had hairy legs. I
We're
did
not
have a
that hairy, but
but they made
okay.
fun of me though, like, they used to make fun of there was this boy in my grade remember those little triangle potato wedges we would get in our lunch? He would hold it up to his face and he'd be like, "Oh, guess who I am? I'm Angela. Look at me." And my nose is everybody can see my nose isn't that big, but all through
Oh,
school,
he would have
everybody
been wearing those potatoes. I would have shoved them up his nose.
see, that's the difference between Kendra and me. Like, this kid would have had, like, potatoes hanging out of his nose if Kendra were sitting there, and I just went home and cried about it. But, like, this attention in the Navy was great, like, until it wasn't, and I realized I was falling back into my same kinda patterns, and, these are the things I read about, when I was researching why some people tend to get re-victimized, and what happened with me, there are 7 different reports that I filed with the Veterans Administration. They're not all for the same type of abuse. Um, there was a corroborated report of date rape, and there was a corroborated report of, um, revenge porn. Basically another sailor I dated had disseminated images he took on his phone of me, that I had allowed him to take in a private setting. And when we broke up, he posted them on his private blog. And back in the day, like we didn't have we didn't have the far-reaching corners of the internet like there are now, but,
Thank
back in these
God.
days, oh my god, thank God. Back in these days, it was more like an Angel Fire, like one of those, like, HTML pages where you could just throw up a personal blog. But anyway, like he had a couple little photos and videos, that he had taken when we were together, and, he was mad when we broke up, and he put them up on his blog, and, you know this was in the middle of my 2-year training, like I am in one of the most difficult programs in the Navy, like the hardest to get into, the hardest to pass. And, the sailor I had broken up with basically put these very private images of me online and invited all of my classmates to view them. And so, every morning when I'm pressing my uniform and shining my shoes and reporting and saluting and standing at parade rest, like I'm having to encounter every male in my class who is walking up to me saying like, "Oh, hey, Ange, like I saw what you did for this guy. Like, when do I get a ride? When's my turn?" Or then like every good grade that I worked really hard to achieve, or every test that I passed, or every accolade that I earned was attributed to basically my being a whore. That's what they used to say in the military. You're either a bitch or a slut. Which one are you?
And that
You know, but
and that's I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's so, like, being just a normal civilian that I am. And I remember when that took place, and eh, like you said, I think it would be. I mean, I definitely would have that poor. That I won't say that poor guy, but he would have been looking for his genital area somewhere else had that happened to me.
I'll
Um,
send you his Facebook profile later.
I'll do my FBI stuff on him. But it's sad. And I know that our military has, and I'm sure you can attest to that too, is our military has come a long way, because this was like right before, I want to say wasn't it right before the Me Too movement, or like when the Me Too
Oh gosh,
movement
it
was
was like
starting?
15 years before that.
Yeah.
This
So yeah, it was before we were given, a voice, and the, like in the Navy or the Army or the Air Forces. And I guess I'm just appalled by what was allowed. Um, and I mean, this isn't a question because there's nothing you can answer with this. I'm just appalled by our government for allowing those things. But do you think, like, predators like him, because that's a predator. That's a person that re-victimized you, or manipulated. Do you think they can recognize somebody who has trauma, so they like go more at them, or try to get
absolutely.
away with more? Okay. That's what, I always thought, like, do they recognize it on us? Is that why? I mean, do we wear, like, I know we're not wearing like a neon sign that says trauma, but it almost sometimes feels that way in some of these situations.
Well, let me break it down for you because I think I have a pretty good idea. Uh, you know, I would always get upset with people who would make it out like, and it's not just me, it's anybody in town. Anytime you hear about some sort of sexual gossip, it's either talking about how promiscuous somebody is or how they just keep walking into the same kind of thing, or God forbid, somebody like Kendra and me, who has been sexually traumatized. The nastiest people are like, how sick is it, that she turns around and then uses sex to get what she wants, you know?
Ugh,
Uh, that's disgusting to me. But let
yes,
me
absolutely.
explain let me
Yeah.
explain
Oh
this
God.
spotlight. So people act like sexual abuse victims go looking for trauma. They act like we're a bunch of dumb idiots who like wander into dark alleys or like seedy bars or are doing Craigslist transactions where we get re-victimized and people are like hesitant to feel sorry for us, like, well, you keep asking for it. And that ain't the thing, folks. Like, we are not wandering into dark alleys and encountering bad people. Bad people are everywhere. Bad people are sitting in that well-lit room with the good people right where you're sitting. like like
Absolutely.
look to your left, look to your right. That person sitting right next to you might be a bad person. I'm not saying statistically the number is that high, but they're sitting right at the table with you, folks. And the reason you don't see them is because you grew up with boundaries. You grew up with stranger danger. You grew up with speak. If you see something, say something. You grew up with all of these lessons. So those bad people sitting with the good people at the bar, they're constantly throwing out little teasers. Like they don't start off committing crimes. They start off testing boundaries. So like if that person to your left or to your right makes a kind of crude comment that doesn't sit well with you, most people just turn to that person and make a little face and say, "What the fuck, dude? Like that was weird." And then they leave. So
Yeah.
that like that bad person doesn't press it any further. They're like, "Oh, well, like this person has boundaries. Like this person isn't an easy target." So they just keep pressing boundaries with different people until they found that one person where they say like the slightly inappropriate thing, and maybe that person like recognizes it's a little inappropriate, and kind of winces a little bit, but doesn't say F off, doesn't turn around and walk away. And the reason, like, we don't, people like Kendra and me, I won't even say Kendra, because Kendra, like, says F off to everybody, but
Not that bad. Maybe a
she's
little.
not walking around like waving her middle fingers or anything.
No, no. Although I
But
did
yeah,
get in trouble. Do you remember, I won't say the name out loud, but we had a lunch lady at the grade school that Angela and I attended, and I flipped her off, and it was, like, maybe, like, what, 6th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. I'll never forget it as long as I live. So I really do not give my middle finger because of that. I might say "F off," but I'm really careful with my middle finger after I had to go down to our principal's office, and I remember it was a wooden
oh, the
board with, like,
paddle with the hole.
yeah, with 6 holes in it, and I won't give the principal's name, but I got spanked for that, and I'm really very cautious with my middle finger. So, I do like my middle finger, attached to my hand. I do not wanna be ever spanked again for doing that, so no. I do not freely give the middle finger.
But yeah, the problem with people like me, who have grown up being, not just sexually abused, but it's the emotional manipulation that comes with it. Like really, it's the layering of the abuse because like for me, it's nervous system patterning. Like how like there's always that social media joke where guys are like, "How come girls never fall for nice guys? Like, they always want the bad boys." Well, like,
Yeah.
that chaos, like, if that's what you grew up in, that feels normal.
Mhm.
The
Well,
normal, safe guys feel boring.
I I also wanna add though, I think the difference too between you and I is your abuse lasted years beyond mine, years before mine, years beyond mine. So that layer of it's easier for me to say F off, or it's easier for me to have discernment. It's easier for me to recognize patterns sooner than later than it was for you because you have like you said with your nervous system and stuff, you have layers of years of abuse that go far beyond mine. And I think our listeners need to understand that too. My abuse was just for a few, I think of like 3 years in total. And, yours started as a baby all the way into high school. I mean, that is years of what I'm going to say indoctrination of what is normal that was being taught to you. So it was almost like it's not saying you were weak by no means. So don't take it like that. But I think all those years of abuse and what you were constantly living in, it shapes and forms you just like it informed me. Like I got my poor attitude and the big F off feelings because I wasn't allowed to do that to your dad. And when I got older, everybody was your dad. And that's where my anger and like I was able to, yeah, F you or recognize these signs sooner. And I'm not saying I've never been re-victimized because I have. We all have anybody that's put to trauma. But I mean, don't you feel that way? Like you're, having that layers of abuse that you endured really it kind of set the tone of not you being weak, but you just not like, you would take things and you would not your red flags didn't come out as fast as mine did.
Well, I forgave people a lot more easily,
Yeah.
and that's what it when you're talking about my layers of abuse, that's what I wanna add. That's I don't know if you realize how much it affects me, and I wanna spell it out for the listeners. I mentioned before that after high school, I had an excellent relationship with my father. When I needed comfort, when I had a problem, when I was sad, uh, anything. Like, I didn't call my mom, I didn't call Kendra, I didn't call Kendra's mom, I called my dad because my dad was always my greatest cheerleader. My dad was always my biggest supporter. My dad never judged me. Like, never said one derogatory word about any of my life choices, any of my promiscuity, any of my perceived failures, any of my parenting. Like, he was unabashedly supportive of me. He let it be known that he would always be there for me. My father did not have a lot of money. He would find things to send me to make my life easier. Like, he was that source of support, and I understand that that's part of the manipulation, and I struggle with that a lot because my father died when I was 32. Since my father's died, I haven't felt like that same kind of connection with somebody else where I can call them as a child and say, "Comfort me."
Do you think, I know that we've come out, I mean, and we've categorized him as a monster, and I want to add, he's not a monster no longer. He's passed. I forgive him. I don't have any feelings. We've talked about this before, but do you think that, like, later on in life and how he was that person for you and comforting, that was that? No, I don't know if he changed. I can't tell you, and I'm not going to give him the credit of changing, but it could possibly be that he regretted everything. And maybe, I mean, I'm just trying to be the advocate here, like, the playing devil's advocate, where it's just, I don't want to give him any credit because he's still what he did. He was a monster, and he will always be that to me. Can forgive somebody, but I can't forget. If you've harmed me in some way that is to my core, I can't forget it. But I to like ease you a little bit and ease your mind is I wonder if he had that remorse.
I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy kind of racking my brain trying to figure that out, and it caused me a lot of mental turmoil trying to reconcile all of
Okay,
that. And, I'm kind of past that.
good.
My emotional state with my dad is very clinical. I'm being truthful, listeners. You might not be there, and it's okay. It's part of your healing journey. There are 7 stages of grief. I'm not gonna try and teach them to you, but read through them. You cycle through them. You go through all of them. There's anger, there's depression. The biggest one for me was the bargaining, the reconciling, and like, what if, what if, what if? And Kendra's the one who had to kind of, shake me a little bit. I don't know if you remember this. You're like, Angela, like, you're so smart. Like you think people come with instruction manuals, and if you just like read the you did say this too. You said you think you could take somebody apart and build them to get put them back together again. She said that's not how people work.
And it's
Yeah,
not, it's not, and that's how you have more of a mechanical brain than I do. Is I think the difference between us, and there are two people, or there's multiple different kinds of people in trauma abuse, especially childhood trauma, where we all heal differently. We all heal at different times. But for you and you know, I am. You give, and this is part of it, you do give people more credit than they deserve, or you'll look at something and think that you can rebuild something, and I take people at face value. And I'm very, and that is the difference, because there you can either have empathy or, and sometimes to me, the reason I wasn't as empathetic as you were, or maybe as vulnerable as you were, was because I did feel that that would set me up for re-victimization. And but so if I was the way I am, you're not, like we said before, you're not gonna F with me because
right.
you're going to look at this person. She has a hard exterior. Okay, I did take on that personality trait, but it didn't mean that's who I am. But I took on that personality trait because I didn't want to go through it again, where you have always been more empathetic and you look at, and I think sometimes the revictimization, I'm not saying this is why you've gone through some of the stuff you've gone through, but you can look at a person, the difference between you and I, and you would see the different layers. You would see, like, maybe I can mechanically fix this person again. And when I said that to you is to try, okay, you can't. And I didn't want, and it was my way of saying, okay, don't fall for this.
Oh,
Don't
I
try
know
to,
it was loving.
yeah, don't try to fix something that is that broken, that is that messed up in the
Like you
mind.
can't fix a psychopath,
No,
Angela.
you can't fix a psychopath. But I love that about you at the same time because you still do that to this day, but you do it with such intelligence now where you are intelligent about before you get involved in something. You really look through and and I've noticed that about you. So, going into this new relationship that you've been in for quite a while now, you were very cautious of a lot of things and even cautious with telling me things and cautious with just, you were that shows growth. That shows healing. That shows, okay, maybe my conversation about building some has really hit home to her because now you're experiencing a love that is genuine, that is not going to re-victimize you. And, I'm going to give him a shout out. He doesn't, we have never talked and he's probably going to think I'm crazy, but I'm going to give him a shout out because, Angela doesn't share everything with me in her private life, but she does share some of the things. And I think it is so amazing that this man will listen to our and critique our podcast before it goes out half the time, and he gives his little his insight on things, and it's been so helpful. But that is such an amazing person to be able to listen to what we go through and what we've been through, and especially a person that he shares now his life with, to hear these things. Kudos to you, man. Kudos to you. I am so glad that my cousin is finally has a person in their life that really compliments them.
Thank you for acknowledging Jimmy like that. Like he's I will give him a proper thank you later too. But, no, it's interesting. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was actually talking to him about this topic and, like how I felt about it. And he brought up to me, he said, Well, you know what's different about our relationship, than relationships that I've been in before?" He said, "Angela, you came out the gate and you shared with me a couple of things, that really made me take pause and, enter this relationship carefully. And, I'll share with Kendra and you guys like what I brought to him. I said to him, you know, I didn't trauma dump on him right away, but I said, historically throughout my life, I was raised in a boundaryless environment. Like, and that informs the way I've entered into relationships, that informs the way I observe the world around me and interact with it. Like, I've really struggled with it. And I said, something that it's important for me right now is being able to assert boundaries. And, I told him it's difficult for me to say no. And, Kindred, I talk about being bitchy people pleasers. The reason I'm a bitchy people pleaser is because, like, I say yes begrudgingly all the time. And it doesn't have to be for something nefarious or ill intended. Maybe somebody just wants to go and get ice cream every day, but like maybe I don't like ice cream because it makes me poop my pants because I'm lactose intolerant, but like I go anyway because it's not a big deal and I like ice cream. But, so like when I say people pleaser, like that doesn't mean like that people around me have bad intent all the time. It's just like I always go with the flow, just not to cause a scene or a fight or anything. And it's like something I don't want to do. And so I explained to him, like when like it's really difficult for me to say no. And where I get argumentative with people or where I feel like I start getting confrontational is when I feel like I have to defend that no. Like when people push back on like that's when that's when I really struggle, and I've even had to talk to my kids about that, like, "Hey, man, like, if I say no, that's gotta fly, like, mommy mommy's gonna get, like, really defensive if you fight back on that no." And, like, that just goes into, this whole re-victimization thing. Like, we have this nervous system patterning, where, like, our stranger danger alarm doesn't necessarily go off right away, so when that creep in the well-lit room, if he said something that makes the normal person walk away, like, maybe I'm a little uncomfortable, but it's not enough for me to, like, walk away because, like, "Hey, man, like, I'm used to it. That's what I grew up with. Like, I was told to sit down and shut up." Kendra, I don't remember if you ever waited tables, but, like,
Oh, yeah.
one of my first jobs is working at, the local diner, where it's all, like, a bunch of grandpas. And, for any of you listeners who have been waitresses, like, in the '80s, '90s, like, old guys pinch your ass, like, old guys slap your ass when you walk by, and, like, the older ladies, like, they say, "Oh, don't mind Herbie, Herbie's an old pervert." And, like, just, like, that's I don't wanna say it's an innocuous example because, like, it's a terrible example, like, we would not allow that now, but 30 years ago, like, that's the kind of shit we would roll our eyes at and say, like, "Oh, well, Herbie, like, old dudes are just perverts, like, we have to put up with it." So then you go into the military, like, "Oh, dudes are just perverts, you have to put up with it." Or, just any of these situations where you're making excuses for people because, like, this obnoxious behavior has been excused your whole life. So you have this nervous system patterning, where it doesn't even register as something's off. Like, you grow up, like, without any kind of boundaries whatsoever, so, like, you don't even know, like, what's cool, what's not cool. You just have to go based on your own gut. But, you've learned not to trust your own gut because when you do speak up, like, somebody tells you to shut up. Or, like, in my case in the military, like, I didn't let it go unreported, like, I did report it right when it happened. Like, they didn't do anything about it, like, I had to stay in the same class with that guy, like, none of us got transferred out, like, I didn't go to counseling or anything. Like, I just had to keep going through that program for 2 more years, like, this hardest fucking program in the Navy, like, I had to keep doing it, and I'll tell you guys, I did a great job, I was still in the top half of my class, like, through all of that shit, so, like, I have always kept my head above water, and Kendra was talking about Me Too, that did pave the way for me to get formal recognition with the federal government.
But it
Just
was just too late. It was too I mean, yeah, you did get great things out of it, but it was also too late for a lot of people because by the time, for you, you came out on the better end of that, but a lot of people dropped out. A lot of people, I remember hearing stories of women that went into the Navy was one of the worst. But, like, even going into the army and just the things that they were said to them on a daily basis, the crude remarks, the cases of rape, it blew my mind that here these women are, they're going out fighting for their country, and men are degrading them the way that they are, and they're just a piece. They're just a piece of equipment, and that is to me is just it still mind blows me that it still because stuff still goes on like that today. Yes, it can be reported, and yes, because of the Me Too movement, things have changed. But and I'm glad it worked out for you. But it did bother me a little bit. It still bothers me that's if I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her going. I wouldn't want her. I mean, I do have a daughter, but if she was like in the what said, "Hey, mom, I'm gonna go to the Navy," I'd be like, "No, like, please don't."
right. But those grooming scripts, the same shit my dad used to say to us, like, those carry forward where when bad stuff does happen, you're like, "Oh, well, it's probably my fault, like, I should have said no earlier," or, like, when he offered to buy me that, like, I should have not accepted that drink, by accepting that drink, I was signaling to him that I was you internalize all the like, basically like, you basically incriminate yourself. You're like, "Oh, yeah, well, here's all the reasons it was my fault." Like, "Oh, let me just go," go in the corner and cry about it.
Well, it's our tolerance level. It's what like you said, you go into we waitress and the old men, do what they got to do, or you're sitting at a bar, and some guys just crude and other people would walk away, but we don't. It's because what we're forced to tolerate all of our lives becomes the norm. And even though we were turned off by a lot of things, we didn't get up and walk away because is this normal? Because we didn't have that, not till years later did we have representation of how men should be and how a man treats a wife or a woman he's dating or the amount of respect that we deserved. So it's a tolerance. It's a tolerance thing. For our listeners, Angie, I really want to talk about, because sometimes people don't think they can get out of that cycle of revictimization, and I wanna let you know, you can break that cycle of revictimization. Angela's broken it. I have broken it. It is healing. It's a process. It's not gonna happen overnight, and I don't wanna think that we're gonna give people this great, hope that it's just you're gonna make the greatest decisions moving forward in all your relationships or all your choices, because until you can realize your red flags. And by us been talking, we've talked and we're showing you some of these red flags, but you have to figure out what those red flags are for you. For me, this is healing is, because I broke that cycle. That was a major part of my healing. It was, it was hard. It was hard because you have to look within and you have to say, okay, yes, we didn't have all these examples that were good, and we were treated poorly, and we got so used to this being the norm, but that's not the norm. And when you discover that and you discover who you are and you take that time, whether it's through counseling, whether it's through spirituality, whatever your journey leads you, that's what breaks the cycle, because it's discernment, your tolerance level. Somebody's talking to you in the lighted room in a poor manner and everybody else is walking away. You're not going to stay either. You're going to walk away because you're going to notice that person. You might not even be standing next to that person because you're going to notice it right away. Angela, if someone's listening today and realizes they have been stuck in the cycle of revictimization, what is one thing that you want them to remember?
One thing that I want listeners to start thinking about, and maybe you don't know the answer right off the top of your head. Maybe take it as a little country crocked homework assignment. But think
Ooh,
about
we're giving out homework.
your kidder's got the red pen. Think about situations, they could be at work, they could be at home, they could be at church, they could be, at a party. Think about situations where somebody made you feel uncomfortable. I want you to think about why that situation made you feel uncomfortable and what is an exit strategy for next time you're in that situation, because that's something I think about all the time, Kendra, and I don't know that I have a good answer for that. Like, I struggle with, like, what is my good exit strategy? And maybe that's something good for everybody to have in their pocket. Is there like a
An
little turn
Irish
of
goodbye. That is the master, the Irish goodbye.
so maybe that's why I'm struggling, because I always wanna, like, explain myself or give a lot of words, and so you heard it right from Kendra, just turn around and walk out, you don't owe anybody an explanation.
You don't, and that's something, I still struggle. You and I will have conversations like that with, I'll say, "Hey," you'll call and you'll tell me, we'll talk about a topic or something that's happened in that day, and I'm like, "Just walk, just just walk away," and you
But I
want
feel
that.
like I have to explain myself.
Yeah, and you feel like you have to explain yourself. But sometimes the Irish goodbye, there was a lady in my life that did this. I watched her, and she did this with that's why I love older people. She did this with almost everything in her life. Like we would be sitting somewhere in a room, and all of a sudden I turn around and she is gone. She went home, didn't tell anybody. And I'm like, what is the benefit? Like, isn't that kind of rude? No, it's not. It actually saves your peace. It absolutely saves your peace. So, like Angela said, if you're in that room, you gotta come up with something. Mine is the Irish goodbye.
Kendra, is there any kind of behavior that we used to normalize when we were kids or teenagers or young adults? Like, is there something that you would not have thought about as creepy when we were younger, where now if you see it, it's like an instant red flag, like bull in a china shop kinda thing.
Absolutely. I am so I have to be careful on how I say this because like we said on this podcast, we don't like to involve outside parties. Um, you know, not our family in particular, but witnessing in another family, the normalization of sexual talk. Like, I think it's disgusting to me. And I don't allow it. Like, I'm not saying, like, if my kids come to me with a sexual question about, their spouse or, they just need help with something, that's different. But to normalize the joking around about sex or like, it makes my skin crawl. Pornography makes my skin crawl. That kind of language, that kind of talk, or if I'm sitting in a group and there's a group of guys or even a group of women who are just degrading or talking about I just look at that in disgust. And I wouldn't have done that years ago. Years ago, it was normal. It was normal because our sexuality was taken, at a very young age. Those things were normalized, but I cannot handle and I don't have a lot to do with some people in this particular family I'm mentioning because of their high sexual content. It's disgusting. And it does turn into perversion and it does open the Pandora's box to things. And I don't tolerate it. What do you remember stuff that you wouldn't tolerate today that you tolerated then?
I think the best examples are probably just, the men's sexual advances, like physical passes. I never had any bodily autonomy. I always felt like my body didn't belong to me. I'm heavily tattooed now. Most of you can't see it on the videos. I have full sleeve tattoos on my arms. They are beautiful pieces of art, and I love them. But, I I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys, yeah, I got tattoos as soon as I could because my parents told me I was never allowed to get a tattoo. Like, they told me what I could and could not do with my body. They said my mother said it was God's temple, like, like I was not to defile God's temple. My father didn't want me to mark my body because, he said my body was beautiful and perfect. And I don't regret getting my tattoos, but I did go and get them, basically as a big middle finger um, to my family. And so I think, some of the behavior that makes my skin crawl now is like the ownership we want to take over our children's bodies. And like that's a really delicate subject too, because that could open many cans of worms, with different lines of discussion. But any of the ways they tried to control my, how I could dress, whether or not I could get tattoos. There was a whole summer between ninth grade and 10th grade where, another one of my cousins spent the summer at my house and she cut my hair for me. Man, I was grounded that whole
I
summer,
remember that.
not allowed to leave the house. And man, man, mom, every time you grounded me, you were just sticking me in that house, without any kind of escape, and that makes me kind of sad now. Um, but yeah, I think behavior that was normalized before that, we need to be alert to now is just like this extreme amount of control we want to exert over our children's bodies. Like let them express themselves. Like let them cut their hair. We don't have to let them dye their hair blue and pierce their noses, but if your daughter wants to wear baggy jeans and sneakers, let her. If your son thinks he
Absolutely.
looks snazzy in a bow tie, like let that little dude wear a bow tie. Like they are expressing themselves.
Yeah, and that's a thin line. It's a thin line of expressing yourselves. Because I pretty much let children, pretty much do, wear like if they wanted to wear matched clothes, even if it was like, oh my God, what are you wearing? Rain boots with, shorts in the middle of winter. Okay. But I let them do that. But we're not saying go let your kids go get tattoos at 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. We're not saying that. So I think we need to clarify that we're not those
Oh, yeah.
parents. We are
I'm
not those
just
parents.
saying, like, I swung real hard like, that
I just
pendulum
know
swings, man.
I just know how some people are, and they'll take it and say, "Well, Kendra and Angela said to let kids just do." No, you don't let
No.
your kids. That's why we have led to the society that we have today, and that is a whole different kind of podcast that we are not going to venture into. But kids still need rules and regulations, and we are very, very much in agreement about that. But what Angela is saying is it was so extreme in her house, and it was so extreme, and that is why the pendulum swung as far as it did, because it wasn't normal. What you went through
I
was
was
not
like,
normal.
"Who are you to tell me what to do with my body? My body has never been my body."
No, exactly.
And then
It's our childhood experiences. They are childhood experiences will shape everything we do in life. And will shape the fact that you went and got tattoos. I have several tattoos because I was told the same thing. We should have talked about that in the spiritual gaslighting, but we did come from highly religious homes. I'm not going to say Christ-like. Yes, my mom is very Christ-like today, but it was so on the religious spectrum where it was, this is the old law, the old ways, and it was so drilled into us. And I think that's why we got the tattoos that we got and why we swung as far as we swung was, not just because they said our bodies weren't ours, but because of it was almost, I'm not gonna say occultish. It kind of, a little bit, a little bit. That's why I think we ran so far away from God and so far away from religion, and because it wasn't an experience with Christ. It was an experience with them reading something in a book and making them feel better about themselves and covering up abuse, and you know that's a
well,
lot.
the other thing that, like, I've been kind of thinking about since we've been doing this, and I haven't really stated, it doesn't need to be flushed out a whole lot, but, it's kind of on the same topic. We're talking about, coming out of our childhood homes and rebelling a little bit. I wasn't a virgin when I got married. And, not every sexual experience I had was some sort of traumatic experience. And you know, I, I just wanna be on the record as saying, like, I wanna be the mouthpiece, for you trauma victims, you know, of course, I wanna see you in godly, relationships, but, you know, you don't need to have a bunch of buyer's remorse, for stuff you've done, and, if you're in a good relation no matter what your situation is, here's what I wanna say, you are allowed to enjoy sex. Like, you are allowed to enjoy sex. You do not need to feel ashamed about, partaking in something that was made to be enjoyed. So if you're struggling with that in your relationship, if you're struggling with intimacy with your partner due to past trauma, like I want you to sit back and examine that. Like that's not God talking. Like that's shame talking. Like that's your abuse talking. Like you're beautiful, you're an adult, like, you are not supposed to be robbed of any of the things that were made for our enjoyment, just because somebody took it from you, like, without you giving it willingly. Like, that thing that happened in your childhood does not need to be a death sentence for the rest of your life, like, you are still allowed to enjoy the things in life that are meant to be enjoyed. And I'm not gonna preach to you about, like, with whom to enjoy those, but, do it safely and with discernment. But I did wanna say that because, that's been kind of a resounding, feedback issue from our listeners, like that shame they still carry even though they're in, these long-term monogamous relationships. They feel like they can't enjoy sex. And, that's what sucks, and like all this, slut shaming comes back with re-victimization, like if somebody were to say to me like, "Oh, well, like none of this Navy stuff would have happened if you weren't such a whore." Hey, you know what? Like I'm still allowed to enjoy sex, the things that happened were not permissible and were not done, with my permission. And so like those things aren't okay. Like you are always allowed to have boundaries. You are always allowed to explore your boundaries. Your boundaries can change even within the even within the boundaries of your relationship, like as you grow and heal and change, your relationship needs to grow and heal and change. And your partner needs to grow and heal and change with you if he or she still wants to be your partner.
I agree. I agree. Well, Angela, it's always fun talking to you. But as we talked earlier at the beginning of this podcast, I live in the Midwest and we have insurance claimer after insurance claimer stopping by to check out damage. So yeah, I have to get to another lovely, lovely insurance person to inspect my home and our vehicles. But I know that you're going to close us out with prayer. But before you do, know that we love you, and that we are here just sharing our stories, never trying to tell you how to heal, how not to be re-victimized. That is completely, utterly up to you to notice these red flags, discernment. That's something as on the spiritual side, I'll say, is praying for discernment. I do that before I walk into every room. I pray for discernment. Even to this day, if I walk into meetings or if I'm walking into a gathering, God, give me the discernment. Let me see what I'm supposed to see. Protect me. And it works. It really works, especially when you sell out completely to Christ. And He will, the Holy Spirit will be your mouthpiece. He'll be your eyes, your ears, and discernment's a real thing, folks. All right, Angela, go ahead and pray us out.
Father God, we talk a lot on this show about what was done to us, but sometimes the hardest part isn't even the first injury. It's the way that trauma seems to echo throughout the years. It's the way that people look at survivors and ask, why does this keep happening? As if the pain was something that we went looking for. But God, you know the truth about every room that we have ever walked into. You know the things that we didn't have words for, and the moments that our instincts were still learning how to speak. God, you knew the homes we grew up in. You know the things that were done to us when we were too young to defend ourselves. You know the ways that we were trained to stay quiet, stay polite, stay small. You saw us when we tried to serve something bigger than ourselves. You saw us in uniform. You saw the moments when the people and institutions that were supposed to protect us did not. So, God, you know what it cost us to keep going even after that. But, Father God, today we're not standing here before you asking you for pity. God, we're asking you for clarity. Father, teach us to trust the alarms in our bodies. Teach us to recognize danger sooner and to leave without apology. Teach us that boundaries are not cruelty, they are wisdom. And for anyone listening who carries the weight of trauma, God, remind them that what happened to them was not a reflection of their worth. Help us do the hard part of untangling the past, breaking the patterns, and protecting the parts of ourselves that were never given that protection before. And God, if we could help even one person recognize danger sooner than we did, I beg you, let that be something good that comes out of all of this. In your heavenly name we pray. Amen.